everybody and welcome to this gouache painting tutorial. If you're new around here, hi, my name is Anna and today we are walking through this full forest painting together step by step. Let's start by quickly going over the tools I'm using. So I'm painting on my watercolor sketchbook today, but any thicker paper would work for this. Then I'm using Holbein Artist Gouache and 3 different brushes for this tutorial, but you can definitely replace the brushes with whatever you have at home, and also any other brand of gouache will definitely work as well. But then let's just jump right in, and I started by framing the page here with some washi tape, so we'll have beautiful clean edges in the end. Then we're actually starting the painting from the background, and we're using this very light bluish gray tone for it. I think the thing that really makes this painting catch the eye is the contrast between the bluish background and the bright orange tones in the trees and ground. You might know that orange and blue are complementary colors, so using them together will often create very beautiful color combinations, and the contrast of these colors is very pleasant for the eye. So I highly recommend adding some of that blue tint to the sky, but I also added a small amount of black to add a little bit of that foggy grayish appearance. I used this flat brush to just sweep the color all over the painting, stopping a little bit before the bottom since that will be for the ground, and adding this color underneath there is just not necessary. I also left the top part slightly lighter and then created this soft gradient towards the middle, so we'll have a little bit more shadows going on in the forest area. Creating this type of gradient effect with gouache paints might be a little bit tricky, but just going back and forward with the colors and adding enough paint to the surface will help. You can also try to clean your brush a little bit after applying the color onto the paper, and then just trying to kind of blend the colors together with water instead of adding more paint. Also, the background doesn't need to be flawless because a lot of it will be covered with the trees later. So when you're somewhat happy with what you have going on, we can then move on to create some initial layers to the ground. I chose this pretty bright orangey brown tone for the crown, which is maybe a little bit darker than what I imagined the crown to be at the end. With gouache paints, usually the darkest colors are added first and then lighter colors on top, but I mean, no one's gonna come after you if you do it other way around. I do it all the time too, but I would maybe consider this first color to be a good in-between shade that you can use as the background layer to build all the highlights and shadows on. So after this first brown layer had somewhat dried, I decided to add just some color variations here in this point, but you can also skip this step and do it later. In general, I wanted the middle top part of the crown to be the lightest in the end, so I added a little bit more darkness around the sides and the lower section. You can get really far with just these tapping motions, and it doesn't even need to be super pretty or precise. In my opinion, some smudginess often creates a little bit more natural outcome, especially when we're painting the nature. But after painting the crown here, we now have a pretty harsh line where the crown meets the sky. So I decided to mix some of the colors from both of these together and add a little bit of this along the horizon line. I think doing this definitely makes everything look a little bit softer, and it also adds a little bit to the foggy appearance of this whole forest. The color you go with doesn't really matter that much, because this will pretty much blend together with the rest of the details later. But now that we have this nice background going on, we can finally jump to the trees. I actually started with some of these grayish trunks that will end up being the ones in the background. Adding a few like this will give a lot more dimension to the forest. So these would be the trees that are further away that we don't see that well. And also don't be afraid to make some trees a little bit more crooked than the others. Or maybe they can lean on one side more than the other. You can also play around with the color intensity. And the amazing thing with gouache is that you can always go over everything with a slightly darker or lighter tone if you're not happy about something. But then I start adding some of the main trees in the picture, so the ones that are the closest to us that will have the most details. So I started these very long stripes of pure white paint, and I'm taking these all the way to the crown part. I know this will look a little bit weird in this point, but we will blend everything together and the trees won't look like this in the end. So I started with just a few of these white trunks and added some more later. But now let's quickly go over how to paint the details of these birch trees. I actually think these are one of the most fun and also the easiest trees to paint. I know they might look a little bit complicated, but I promise they are not. So I think it's usually the easiest to start from the bottom and start making some pretty dark smudges and details all over the white space, especially focusing on the sides of the tree. I usually try to choose one side of the tree that has a little bit more shadows. And in this picture, I thought that the lightest point would be in the middle. So on the right side of the painting, the shadows would land on the right side, and on these left trees, the shadowy part would be the left side. So I pretty much covered the whole shadowy side with some light grayish brown, and then add also those darker spots and smudges in between. Again, there are no rules, no right or wrong way to do any of this. I usually find that the more random you make everything, the more natural it will look. So don't be afraid to change the sizes and placement of the dark details, and then blend some of those light grayish tones somewhere between. Then I added some of these really skinny branches with black paint that will kind of be guidelines for the leaves. Having a really thin brush will definitely help with these, and also using a very light hand with these strokes. So I just continued doing the same thing for the rest of these trees. I went for a slightly more minimal look this time, so my painting ended up having quite a lot of empty space between most of these trees. And then you can always add some more of those darker trunks to the background if you want, and maybe even add some light shadows and details to them as well. But now that we have some trees here, it's time to move on to the leaves, and I will continue with this small brush here as well. So I mixed some dark orange and yellow paints together and tried to keep these colors very bright, and then I just started tapping these on. I wanted the leaves here in the center to be the lightest, and then I mixed a little bit more brownish tones to the ones on the edges. You might also notice that I added some much lighter leaves, especially towards the top part of the painting, and again I think these will create the appearance that there are also some leaves a little bit further away from us, and then the bright orange leaves are the ones that are up close. I also added some lighter and darker leaves on top of the first layer, which also creates some dimension and lights and shadows to them. Also adding a few flyaway leaves here and there adds a really cute look in my opinion, so feel free to experiment with this part as much as you want. But when you're finally happy with the amount of leaves, the last thing is to add the final touches to the crown part. I used some of these same bright orange and yellow tones and started to add some more highlights here and there. So I focused most of the lightness here in the center again, and then also started to smudge the lower parts of the trees a little bit more to the crown. And those will be the areas that are the darkest in the crown, so that it almost looks like the trees are creating some shadows on the forest floor. So just continue with the same tapping as long as you want, and after you've finally done your own finishing touches to the crown, that's finally it for this painting. I really hope you like this picture and that you will give this a go. It really is much easier to paint than it looks. And if you really like how my version ended up, I did add it to my shop as an art print, so if any of you are interested, you're able to purchase it in 3 different sizes. If this was your first time here on the channel and you'd like to stay tuned for more painting in the future, definitely consider subscribing. And if you'd like to see even more tutorials from me, I also have a Patreon where I post 1 extra painting tutorial every month with some other extra benefits as well. But I think that's finally all for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're having an amazing day or night wherever you are. And see you in my next one. Bye bye.